I never thought that I'd stand hidden behind a stone pillar at my own daughter's wedding, clutching a gift bag like a forgotten guest. The marble was cool against my back, a stark contrast to the thick summer air that clung to my skin and filled my lungs like syrup. My heels pinched. I hadn't worn them in years, but I wanted to look nice. Presentable. Worthy, maybe. The cab had been late. Traffic from the church to the venue was a disaster, and of course, I hadn't been told the correct start time until the night before. A flurry of texts from Rachel's friend, vague and riddled with emojis, told me to try to be there by 4. Not 2, not 3 to 4. So I was late. But I'd made it, or so I thought. Inside the venue, the cool air and the scent of roses and champagne drifted over me. I stepped carefully onto the edge of the reception hall, where soft music played beneath a dull murmur of clinking glasses. I was still smoothing the hem of my dress when I heard Rachel's voice rise above the noise, sharp and clear through the microphone. "Good thing she didn't come," she said, mid-toast. There was laughter, not polite or awkward, but real. Loud. From him. From others. Even the DJ chuckled. I stopped breathing. The gift bag slipped slightly in my hand. A soft crinkle. I stayed still, the way you do when you've broken something valuable and can't bear to look down. Her voice was syrupy sweet now, talking about fresh starts, and choosing your family. I knew that tone. It wasn't meant for kindness. It was meant to close doors. I turned without a sound, back into the hallway, then out into the parking lot where the streetlights flickered to life. The city smelled of hot pavement and bridal perfume. I stood there for a moment, holding her gift, a handmade quilt I'd spent months stitching, every square a memory. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just turned and walked toward the main road, heels clacking, dignity intact. I wasn't supposed to be there. That much was clear. But I had been. I heard what I needed to hear. And that changed everything. I didn't sleep. Not even a little. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly, clicking every few turns like it was counting my regrets. By morning, I gave up pretending and went to the kitchen. The house was quiet, too quiet. That kind of silence that hums in your ears like an accusation. The kettle had cooled by the time I remembered I'd turned it on. I poured the lukewarm water anyway, steeped a bag of chamomile, and sat at the table in my robe, staring at nothing. The cup was blue and chipped on one side. Rachel had made it in pottery class when she was 9. She hated it, called it lumpy, but I kept it, always. I never threw away anything she made. Her voice kept replaying in my head, that awful moment from the toast. Good thing she didn't come. I could still hear the laughter. It had a sharpness to it, like broken glass. She knew I'd hear about it eventually. Maybe she even hoped I would. That was the part that cut deepest. How did we get here? I traced my finger along the table's grain, a slow, repetitive motion, one I did when she was small and sick, rocking her at night while humming under my breath. It used to calm her. Now, I used it to calm myself. I'd forgiven so many small slights over the years. The missed calls, the way she downplayed me around her friends, the birthday dinners she forgot until the last minute. I told myself she was busy, that modern life was hard. But this wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't stress. This was precision. A scalpel, not a hammer. She wanted people to believe I didn't care. That I was selfish, bitter, absent. I wasn't perfect, God knows. But I was there, always there. The tea had gone cold by the time I realized my hand was shaking. I placed the cup down gently. No more pretending. No more making excuses for her cruelty. Something in me shifted, quiet and firm. A line had been crossed, and it wasn't going to be forgotten. She wanted me gone from her story. Erased. But I've lived too long to disappear that easily. I sat on the edge of my bed, the chipped blue mug beside me, and let my mind wander backward, because when the present feels unbearable, the past can feel like a softer pillow. Rachel was 12 the night of her school play. She'd played a tree, yes, a tree, with a paper crown of leaves and a nervous smile that made my heart ache. Her father was already long gone by then. He'd promised to come, then didn't. The seat next to mine stayed empty, like so many others in our lives. But I clapped the loudest. She looked for me in the crowd, found me, and beamed. That night, back in her bedroom, she sobbed against my chest. I remember the way her hair smelled, shampoo and sugar cookies from the school bake sale. "At least you came, Mama," she whispered. I held her tighter, wrapped her in her fleece blanket with the little ducks on it. That blanket lived on her bed until college. And after that, in a box in my attic. I never threw it out. I used to be her person. The one she ran to when her heart broke or her friends turned cold. I knew all her fears, thunderstorms, the dark, and growing up. We made up bedtime songs and wrote letters to each other when she was too shy to say how she felt. I kept every one. But something changed after college. It was slow, subtle, like the way autumn creeps in. She'd call less, be vague about visits, and when she did come home, she brought him. Her fiancé, Thomas, was all charm and polished smiles. He always smelled like cologne and ambition. And Rachel, around him, changed. She laughed louder, acted cooler, sharper. If I asked a question, she'd sigh, like I was being difficult. Once, I offered to pay for her flight back for Christmas. She refused, said they had grown-up plans and didn't need handouts. That word, handouts. It stung more than I let on. When I tried to remind her of old stories, she acted like they embarrassed her. "You're remembering it wrong, Mom," she'd say, and he'd smirk quietly behind his wine glass. Like I was the senile one. The burden. They had their life. I wasn't part of it. But she never told him the truth. Not about the loans I paid. The jobs I took to cover her tuition gaps. The time I pawned my mother's ring to pay her rent in grad school. She let him think she'd done it all on her own. And I let her. I was afraid that if I said too much, I'd lose what little space I still held in her world. I thought I was being noble. But now, I see it for what it was. Silence, dressed up as love. And it had cost me everything. The same girl who once clung to me in the dark was now the woman who stood in front of a roomful of guests and laughed about my absence. I got up and walked to the linen closet. I pulled down the old fleece blanket, the one with the ducks. It still smelled faintly of lavender and childhood. I pressed it to my face and closed my eyes. No one becomes cold overnight. And no one gets erased unless they allow it. Well, I'd allowed enough. That afternoon, I opened the door to the guest bedroom. The room hadn't changed in years. Pale green walls, lace curtains, and the faint smell of cedar from the old hope chest beneath the window. It was the quietest place in the house, where time stood still. I went there whenever I felt overwhelmed, and today, it pulled me like a magnet. The late sunlight streamed through the curtains, throwing golden patches onto the carpet. I knelt in front of the cedar chest, its brass latch cool beneath my fingers. Inside were scraps of a life I'd lived behind the curtain, things no one ever saw. Faded report cards. A lock of Rachel's hair from her first haircut. Cards she'd made, with shaky handwriting that read, "To the best mommy ever." And then, behind a stack of photo albums, I found it, an old manila envelope, sealed but brittle at the corners. I hadn't seen it in years. Inside were receipts. Dozens of them. A semester's tuition, paid in full when she lost her scholarship sophomore year. A check to a used car dealership, her first car, which she'd claimed Thomas had surprised her with. I still had the pink slip in my name. Another receipt showed a payment made to cover a deposit when Thomas had lost his job for 3 months. Rachel had said they figured it out together. But it had been me. Quietly, without asking anything in return. Beneath the receipts were 3 letters. Rachel's handwriting, hurried and warm. "Mom, I don't know what I'd do without you. Please don't tell Thomas. I don't want him to feel like a failure." That one hit the hardest. I sat back against the wall, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. All this time, I'd been the secret helper, the hidden hand. She'd used my love like scaffolding, building her new life on top of it, while pretending I didn't exist. The injustice stung, but so did the pity I'd once felt for her. She'd always wanted to seem stronger than she was, and I, fool that I am, had let her lean on me in the shadows while pretending she stood alone in the light. I looked over at the old writing desk in the corner. A layer of dust covered the top, but a drawer still held unused stationery. Ivory-colored cards with gold trim. I used to send thank you notes on those, back when people still had the manners to appreciate effort. An idea began to form, not cruel, but clear. I wasn't going to scream or accuse. That wasn't my way. But if her husband thought she had done it all herself, if he'd never heard my name spoken in gratitude, well, maybe it was time someone whispered the truth in his ear. Not out of revenge, out of self-respect. I hadn't been to the old stationery shop in years. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and the scent of ink and polished wood wrapped around me like a familiar shawl. The aisles were quiet, the kind of place where whispers feel more appropriate than conversation. A young woman at the counter looked up and smiled politely. "Looking for anything special today?" "Something simple," I said. "Ivory. No glitter. Just sincere." She guided me to a shelf of classic folded cards. I ran my fingers over the edges, remembering how Rachel used to help me pick cards for birthdays when she was little. She always chose the ones with animals or too many flowers. I picked one with a soft gold border and bought a matching envelope. I also bought a new pen, fine point, black ink, the kind that doesn't smudge. Back home, I sat at the dining room table, the wood worn smooth from years of meals, homework, and holiday candlelight. I took a deep breath and began to write. "Dear Thomas," I started. No fuss, no preamble, just the truth, written with the same steadiness I'd used to raise a child, keep a household, and rebuild a life after divorce. I didn't accuse. I didn't insult. I told stories. Quiet, factual ones. I included copies of the receipts, the tuition, the car, the deposit. I even tucked in a picture of Rachel standing next to her first car, keys in hand, a big red bow on the hood. I was behind the camera, but you could see the nameplate on the windshield. Belongs to Marisol Rivera. My name, not his. I told him I wasn't angry. I simply thought he had the right to know the version of the story that had never been told. That sometimes, in silence, truth rots. And that I was tired of watching myself disappear. I signed it with care. "Wishing you clarity and kindness, Marisol." No, Mom. No, mother-in-law. Just me. I folded everything and sealed it in the white envelope. On the front, I wrote his full name and the address of his office. I marked it personal, confidential. The next morning, I took the long way to the post office, passing by the coffee shop where Rachel and I used to split blueberry muffins. The memory felt distant, like watching someone else's life through a window. Still, I nodded to the barista through the glass, as if to prove I still belonged in the world. At the post office, the woman behind the counter weighed the envelope gently. "Just one today?" she asked. "Just one," I said. But it was the heaviest letter I'd ever sent. As I walked out, the wind picked up slightly, lifting the edge of my coat. I pulled it tighter, felt the pen in my pocket like a quiet dagger, and thought, whatever happens next, at least I won't have lied by omission. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was recognition. And finally, after all these years, I had given myself permission to ask for it. Sunday came, and with it, that dull ache behind my ribs. I dressed slowly, smoothing the front of my blouse with nervous fingers. Church was routine for me, habit, comfort, and penance all rolled into one. But today I stayed behind after the service, sitting alone on one of the folding chairs in the community center, sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup. Sister Mary noticed me. She's been around longer than most of the congregation, white-haired and firm, with the kind of presence that made people straighten their backs. She sat beside me without asking. "You've got that look," she said. I gave a little shrug, swirling the coffee. "Is it wrong to tell someone the truth when your child has lied?" My voice was quieter than I expected. She didn't answer right away. She reached for a sugar packet, poured it into her own cup, stirred slowly. Finally, she looked me square in the eye. Sometimes silence becomes complicity. The words landed hard. She wasn't judging me. She was reminding me who I'd always been, someone who told the truth, even when it stung. I didn't explain the whole thing. I didn't need to. Her hand rested briefly on mine, warm and solid. That one touch gave me the final push. As I walked home, the fall wind carried the scent of distant fireplaces and dry leaves, brittle underfoot. The ivory envelope waited for me on the hallway table, like a quiet witness. I picked it up, heavier now with the weight of moral clarity. Tomorrow, I would send it. Not to destroy, but to stop pretending. Monday morning was gray and crisp, the kind of morning that makes your joints ache a little more and your mind feel sharper than usual. I dressed with care, nothing dramatic, just slacks and a wool coat, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons Rachel used to love playing with as a toddler. I tucked the envelope into my handbag, right next to a pack of tissues and a lemon candy, as if I were going on a long journey instead of just down the street. The post office was nearly empty. The clerk recognized me and waved. I nodded back, saying nothing. My fingers brushed the smooth paper of the envelope as I placed it on the counter. I'd written Thomas's full name, his company's address, marked it clearly, personal and confidential. Open only. He'd open it alone. At his desk, maybe with a cup of coffee in hand and no Rachel nearby to offer commentary or spin. That was the point. The clerk asked, "Would you like tracking?" "No," I said. "It just needs to arrive." And that was it. A soft thump of the stamp, and it was no longer mine. The letter was out in the world now, like a ship sent across uncertain waters. Walking home, I passed the florist's window. Inside, a woman my age was buying a bouquet of sunflowers. Rachel used to pick sunflowers for me when she was small. I stopped and watched for a moment, then turned away. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't want to blow her world apart. I wanted someone to see what had really happened. To know I wasn't absent, bitter, or selfish, but silenced, strategically, over time. She'd told everyone I didn't come. But I had. I always had. The phone rang just after lunch, sharp and sudden. I nearly dropped my teacup. I wasn't expecting anyone, not on a Tuesday, not after what I'd done. But some part of me already knew who it would be. "How dare you?" Rachel's voice exploded before I could say hello. I closed my eyes. "Rachel, number. No, you don't get to play the victim. How dare you send him lies about me?" Her words came fast, ragged, but carefully chosen. Her fury wasn't confused, it was defensive. She wasn't shocked. She was caught. "I didn't lie," I said, keeping my voice even. "I sent receipts. Your handwriting. Your words. You're twisting everything," she hissed. "You want him to hate me." I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the wilting mums in the yard. "No, Rachel. I want someone to know I was there. That I mattered." Silence. Then she said it, the thing she'd been holding like a dagger. "You were always too much. Too emotional. You needed to be needed, and I got tired of carrying your guilt." It hit harder than I expected. My hand trembled against the windowsill. She kept going. "You ruined everything. Don't call me. Don't write. You're out of my life." The line went dead. The room felt colder, like the heat had quietly slipped out through some unseen crack. I stood there, fingers still curled around the phone. No tears came, not yet. I just breathed in the silence. It tasted like dust and lavender from the sachets I kept in the curtains. I was shaking, but I wasn't sorry. She could scream, accuse, rewrite, but the letter had landed. The truth was out, and the person who mattered most now knew her story wasn't the only one. A week passed. No calls, no letters, just silence, thick and absolute. Each morning, I stepped into my small garden, wrapped in my old cardigan, the one with the loose button I kept meaning to fix. The air had cooled, and the dahlias were in their final bloom, their deep reds and oranges heavy with late-season pride. I watered them slowly, the hose warm in my hand from the sun. No one was watching, no one was clapping, but still, I cared for them. I used to chase after Rachel's approval like a girl chasing kites. Every word I spoke, every gift, every birthday card was another tug at the string, hoping she'd look down and smile. But now, I wasn't holding that string anymore. It hurt. Of course it did. But there was something strange, almost beautiful, in the quiet. I could hear the wind in the trees again, the distant chatter of children walking to school. I could even hear myself think. I poured out old water from the flower tray and watched it pool in the soil. The earth soaked it up without thanks or complaint. It just took what it needed. That was the difference. The garden didn't lie. The garden didn't forget. I pulled a few weeds, brushed dirt from my hands onto my pants, and stood back to admire the late bloomers. Strong, defiant, a little weathered, but still standing. Just like me. It was a Thursday afternoon, just after I'd sat down with a crossword and a bowl of pear slices dusted with cinnamon, when I saw a car slow in front of the house. Sleek, familiar. My heart stuttered. Thomas. He stepped out slowly, wearing a button-down and the tired expression of someone who hadn't slept well in days. The envelope was in his hand, creased, opened, and read. I watched from the front window, unmoving, as he walked up the steps. For a brief second, I thought he might turn around. He didn't. I opened the door before he knocked. The air between us was thick, hesitant. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. Of course. We sat in the living room, opposite sides of the coffee table, like opposing lawyers in a quiet trial. I noticed he still wore his wedding ring. His fingers tapped it, a nervous tick. Rachel used to do the same with her necklace when she was lying. He placed the envelope on the table and stared at it. Why didn't she tell me any of this? I didn't answer right away. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old wood. I reached for my teacup, not because I needed tea, but because I needed something to hold. "I think she wanted you to believe she didn't need help," I said softly. "That she built everything herself. I was just background noise." He nodded, slowly, his eyes never leaving the papers. "She said you were unstable. Controlling. That you tried to manipulate her into staying dependent." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse in silence. "And did you believe that?" I asked. "I did," he admitted, voice cracking. "She never wanted you around. Said you were better at a distance." I looked down at the hem of my blouse, smoothed it with 2 fingers. Rachel always hated wrinkles. I was the one who kept her rent paid when she was drowning. The one who helped her study for exams over the phone, who listened through every heartbreak, I said, not angrily, just honestly. But I never asked for credit. Maybe that was the mistake. Thomas sat back, rubbed his face with both hands. He looked 10 years older than he had at the wedding. "I feel like I've been lied to for years," he said quietly. "And I let her do it because it was easier." I gave a tired smile. "Most lies are." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing past the portrait she'd painted. His voice softened. "I don't know what to do now." I reached across the table and gently touched the envelope. "That's not for me to decide. But at least now, you know." He left not long after. No dramatic declarations, no promises, just a quiet thank you and the heavy footsteps of a man realizing his world might not be what he thought it was. I watched from the porch as he drove away. The wind had picked up, scattering dried leaves across the sidewalk. One landed at my feet, a perfect, golden thing about to crumble. Sometimes the truth doesn't explode. Sometimes it just shifts the ground beneath your feet. He returned the next evening. I hadn't expected him again so soon, but there he was, knocking gently like someone who wasn't sure he deserved to be let in. I opened the door and found him standing on my porch, holding a manila folder this time. "I brought some things," he said. "I think we should talk more." We sat on the couch. I had lit a cinnamon candle without thinking. It filled the room with a scent Rachel used to love before she claimed she was allergic to fake nostalgia. Thomas placed the folder between us. Inside were notes, his dates, timelines. He had started comparing Rachel's stories to what I had shared. Holes were forming in her version, big enough to see daylight through. He looked up at me. "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" The question hit me like cold air. I tucked my legs beneath me and took a breath. Because I was her mother. I thought my job was to support, not expose. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, she'd remember who I was. His face twisted slightly, something between sympathy and shame. She said you tried to control her, he muttered. That you made her feel small. I nodded. She was always smart, independent. But she also wanted to be seen as invincible. And if she let anyone see the scaffolding, me, that illusion crumbled. I told him about the small things. The sleepless nights when she called me crying after a fight with him. The times I drove hours to her apartment to clean after she was too overwhelmed to get out of bed. How she made me promise never to tell anyone. I didn't paint her as a villain. I didn't have to. The truth stood on its own, soft, sad, and immovable. He sat there, hands clasped between his knees. She convinced me you were toxic. That you couldn't be trusted with anything important. I looked him in the eye. And yet I was trusted with everything when no one else knew. There was a long pause. He ran a hand through his hair, then laughed softly, a bitter, broken sound. I married someone I don't fully know. That doesn't mean you didn't love her, I said gently. It just means now, you get to decide if you still can, knowing the whole story. He didn't respond, but he stayed there, in the candlelight, for a long time. Just sitting. No anger. No more denial. Truth has a way of stripping things bare. And when what's left still matters, that's when you know what's real. That night, after Thomas left, I didn't turn on the TV or make my usual cup of tea. I went straight to my bedroom and pulled the old leather-bound journal from my dresser drawer, the one with the frayed ribbon and gold edges that Rachel gave me years ago for Mother's Day, back when she still signed cards with hearts. I hadn't written in it since 2017. I sat at my vanity, the lamplight soft and golden, and opened to a fresh page. My pen hovered in the air for a moment before touching down. March 14, 2013 paid Rachel's final tuition installment. She never told Thomas. She cried on the phone and promised to pay me back. I flipped the receipts over as I went. Matched dates to memories. Labeled everything in black ink, with careful lines and margins. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the narrative. For too long, I had been the invisible scaffolding in her life, supporting, quiet, removed when no longer needed. But I still had a voice. And I wouldn't let her edit me out of my own story. When I finished writing, I leaned back and exhaled, a sharp, cleansing breath that reached places I didn't realize were still clenched. My hands smelled faintly of ink and lilac lotion. I stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror, my face older, yes, but steadier. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. It was late, but he answered. Everything all right? He asked, voice rough with sleep. I'd like to review my will, I said. Soon. Tomorrow, if possible. He paused, then said, I'll make time. I hung up, placed the journal in the fireproof box under my bed, and turned out the light. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to scream on sidewalks or demand apologies. But I was going to ensure that, one way or another, the truth would outlive us both. And if she was already rewriting my legacy while I was still alive, God knows what she'd try when I was gone. Not on my watch. The next morning, I dressed with purpose. Navy blazer, slacks, low heels, the kind of outfit that says, I am not to be underestimated. The air was crisp and dry, and the city felt oddly still, as if holding its breath. I arrived at Mr. Castillo's office just after 10. He was an old friend, the kind who had seen me through messy tax seasons, house repairs, and the early days of my divorce. He offered me coffee, which I declined, and we got right to it. I want to update my will, I told him. Remove Rachel entirely. I'm setting up a scholarship fund instead. He gave a solemn nod, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker of hesitation. There's something I think you need to know before we proceed, he said, reaching into a drawer. He pulled out a thick file and opened it to reveal a letter. My name at the top, typed neatly, dated almost 6 months ago. I sent you this, but I never heard back, he said. Rachel contacted us earlier this year. She claimed you were in early-stage dementia and requested to be added as power of attorney. My mouth went dry. I leaned forward, squinting at the signature line, Rachel's unmistakable looped handwriting. She said you were forgetting things, he continued. That you'd started giving money away randomly, and that you asked her to step in, before you embarrassed yourself. She wanted access to your accounts. I stared at him. And you believed her? I didn't, he said gently. You've always been sharper than half my clients. I stalled the request and sent this letter by certified mail. I felt a flush of shame crawl up my neck. I never opened it. I thought it was about property tax. I let it sit in the mail pile. He sighed. Good instincts or divine intervention. Either way, it never went through. I sat back, stunned. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was legal, calculated. She hadn't just lied about me, she had tried to replace me. I could have lost everything, I whispered. He nodded. You didn't, but you were close. The room smelled faintly of pine wood and legal paper, a scent I now associated with both protection and grief. I signed the updated documents with steady hands, each stroke of my pen a declaration, no more silence. As I left the office, the autumn wind hit me full in the face, sharp and bracing. My scarf fluttered around my neck like a banner. Rachel hadn't just rewritten our past, she had tried to rewrite my future. But I had the pen now. And I knew how to use it. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I just went. Her building had one of those buzzers that never quite worked right. I waited until someone came out with a dog and slipped in behind them. Her door was 3C, same apartment I'd helped pay the deposit for when she and Thomas first moved in. When she opened the door and saw me, her face dropped. Not in surprise, but irritation. Like I was a neighbor selling vacuum cleaners. You shouldn't be here, she said. I held the file in my hand, the letter from my lawyer tucked neatly on top. We need to talk. She crossed her arms. If this is about your little stunt with Thomas, it's about what you tried to do behind my back. Pretending I had dementia. Trying to move my assets into your name. I didn't yell. I just stood there, letting the weight of it settle in the hallway. She didn't flinch. That's what startled me most. Fine, she said. I was protecting you, and your money, from your own poor decisions. You're alone. You've always been alone. No, I said. I've always been available. There's a difference. She took a breath. You never really loved me. You just needed to feel needed. Her voice was ice, and maybe she meant it to wound. But something in me hardened. And you, I said calmly, needed someone to blame. For your choices. For your secrets. For the lies you told your husband and yourself. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. I heard a television playing faintly in another unit. I felt the envelope in my hand, cool and sharp at the edges. She looked away. Not ashamed. Just done. I didn't wait for more. I didn't ask why. I'd stopped needing answers from someone who only ever saw my love as a liability. I turned and walked back down the hallway, my heels echoing on the tile. Each step felt lighter than the last. She could keep her silence. I had finally found mine, and it wasn't empty. It was powerful. I was halfway down the front steps when I heard the car pull up. Thomas. He got out, briefcase in hand, confusion flickering across his face as he saw me. Then Rachel appeared behind me, at the doorway, her voice tight. You didn't tell me you were coming back early. I needed to, he said, eyes shifting between us. Marisol, can you stay a moment? I hesitated, then nodded. I stepped aside as he walked past me toward Rachel, who was now frozen like a figure on display. Her expression cracked for the first time. I've spoken to the lawyer, he said, voice flat. He showed me everything. You forged documents. Tried to transfer her assets. Rachel blinked, but said nothing. Do you have any idea how serious that is? He asked. Her arms folded tightly. She's exaggerating. I read the paperwork, he snapped. I saw your signature. You lied to me about everything. About your past. About her. About who paid for what. I thought you were protecting her from yourself, but it was the other way around. Rachel turned on him then, desperate now. You're believing her over me? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. "No," he said. "I'm believing the facts." Silence fell. For the first time, Rachel looked small, not angry, not smug, just small. And I realized, this was it. The moment I thought I needed for so long. The public unmasking. The justice. But it didn't feel triumphant. It just felt quiet. Thomas turned to me. "I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded. "You didn't know." He looked back at Rachel. "We're done. At least for now. I need time." And just like that, he walked away, into the building, past her, past everything she tried to protect with lies. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, the wind catching the hem of my coat, the late afternoon sun turning the pavement gold. She didn't follow him, and she didn't look back at me, because there was nothing left to say. The next week, I returned to Mr. Castillo's office, this time with no hesitation, no ache in my chest. I handed him a sealed envelope, my final version of the will, with a new directive attached. "Remove Rachel completely," I said. "No life insurance, no assets. Nothing." He glanced at me. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I replied, folding my hands. "But I don't want to waste what I've built. I want to create something useful." He read the next page and raised his eyebrows. "A scholarship fund?" I nodded. "For girls like her, ambitious, smart, but maybe without the right support. Maybe they'll learn to tell the truth a little sooner. Maybe they'll grow into women who don't need to lie to be loved." We filed everything that day. Legal, binding, final. Later, at home, I placed the notarized documents in the fireproof box next to my journal. The pen I had used sat on top, empty of ink but full of meaning. A few days later, word quietly spread through our circle. Thomas had moved out. No shouting, no drama. Just a clean break. Rachel didn't call. She didn't fight it. I suppose even she understood that some things can't be spun back into place once they've unraveled. She had burned the bridge and assumed I'd come swimming through the ashes anyway. But not this time. This time, I built a door in a different direction. And I walked through it. Alone, but not broken. Now, every Saturday morning, I come to this park with a book I rarely read and a thermos of cinnamon tea. I sit on the same bench beneath the maple tree, the one that blushes red earliest in the season. I watch the children run, fall, get up again, laughter echoing like wind chimes through the crisp air. No one knows me here. I like that. I'm just a woman in a coat with soft hands and a quiet smile. Not a bitter mother. Not a victim. Just me. Sometimes I see mothers holding toddlers, brushing leaves from their tiny sweaters, tying shoes that won't stay tied. And I remember. I remember when Rachel called me mama, with eyes full of trust. I remember lullabies and sticky hands and the way her whole body relaxed when I whispered, "I'm here." Some part of me will always love that child. But I've had to let go of the woman she became. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not permission to return. It's not erasure. It's simply choosing not to carry the weight of someone else's shame on your back. She rewrote me for years, buried me under fiction and half-truths, convinced others I was someone to pity, or worse, to avoid. But in the end, I told my story. Quietly, precisely, and it was enough. So now, I sit here, sipping my tea, letting the sun warm my shoulders while the leaves dance around my feet. I don't need applause. I don't need her to come crawling back. I have my name. I have my truth. And I have peace. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. And more than she ever expected I'd keep.